Hey, what's up, guys? You're listening to a brand new episode of Speaking Wrestling. This is episode 59. And right now I'm watching Conan take on Norman Smiley on an episode of Nitro back in 1998. Good stuff here, guys. And look, like I said a few weeks ago, the show is not dead. The show will continue. Just taking a little bit of a break throughout the days, unwinding here as of summer's officially started. School's officially out for the kids. So just a little bit of more taking my time, but the show is not dead. Podcast is still being produced, guys. So hang on in there, guys. But I do want to record an episode to let you guys know on an update of what's been going on with the podcast, and also give you guys a chance to know more about the history. A few weeks ago, this podcast turned 1 year old. So we're going to go down a little trip of memory lane and talk to you about the inception of this project and how it came together, and then what I went through the process of speaking wrestling throughout the first year, guys. And also going to give you guys MVPs and floppers of the week. So, of course, stick around for that. So let's get going, guys. What I've been up to lately is just been hanging out with the kid and my family, of course, at home working. And, that's a little bit of my personal life. So as to why the podcast has kind of been more slowed down in the last couple of weeks. And also to a little bit of like WWE at the moment. As you know, the ratings and the kind of the interest hasn't been there. I personally have not been a big fan of Monday Night Raw for the past couple of weeks. But SmackDown, on the other hand, they've been really, doing some good episodes, especially with that Jeff Hardy, The Miz and Morrison, and Braun Strowman stuff has been amazing. The Intercontinental Championship tournament has been good. So SmackDown has been doing great. And with the recent news of Paul Heyman having to step down and go back to just being an on-screen character, and Bruce Prichard, Prichard, now going to be taking on both Raw and SmackDown as the executive writer there. So, a lot on his plate, but I think this is really good news for us because this is something we've been wanting for a while. I mean, Raw has just been unbearable. So good stuff there. Hopefully, again, some of that SmackDown stuff goes over to Raw and we see a better show in the upcoming weeks. And I've been keeping up with the rest of the stuff. AEW, of course, has been cranking out some good shows. NXT just had In Your House last week, which was a tremendous show. Good stuff there. Io Shirai, Finn Balor had great matches. So that's what's been going on with me. And like I said, a few weeks ago, this podcast turned 1 year old. And for that, I didn't really get to mention, I wanted to talk about, a little bit more in depth of to how this whole project came along, why it came along, why I decided to create Speaking Wrestling, and, what was the process like throughout the first year of this podcast. And going back to actually when I actually did get an idea to want to record was like 10 years ago. But of course, me being a bit of a procrastinator, I just didn't get to it, or I just always made excuses throughout the years. But finally, I guess I really just said, I got to do it. I talk about wrestling. I think about wrestling most of my days. Literally throughout my day. I could be at work, I could be driving, and I'll be thinking of a strange, type of facts, like how many times was John Morrison Intercontinental Champion, and which pay-per-view or event did he win them all. Then I would just think about go ahead and name every single Royal Rumble winner right now in your head. And it's just I do that all the time. I do that all the time. I'll make up scenarios like we all do as wrestling fans. We think of fantasy bookings, and then we think of better ideas, or we do Monday morning quarterback. But in most cases with wrestling, it is Monday morning quarterback. After a pay-per-view, we're kind of thinking, they should have done this and they could have done that. So a lot of that happens. So I just felt like it was just time to put this on to put it on the surface, put my thoughts and ideas out there, because it's good to share ideas, and it's good to hear from others. There's a great deal of podcasts that I support this podcast and I listen to, that they have great ideas. Half K podcast, shout out to them. Double Turn podcast, you guys, thank you so much for the first year, really being a little bit of a community and a little bit of a friendship between some other podcasts. So that's one good thing about this podcast, is that you tend to create a little bit of a friendship and bond with other people that are doing the same hustle. But back to the idea of when I really wanted to start recording, and or it went back to the summer of 2010, and I really wanted to do like a review, but I didn't have the equipment, and I always just thought, well, I had a phone, a video phone, but I'm just like, I don't know. If I'm gonna put something out, I don't want to just be sitting in my room on like the most cheapest video phone. It's like pre like a Galaxy or what or a iPhone, so it's one of those early stages video phones. So it really wasn't good. The audio wasn't good, and I just like, whatever. And the first time I actually, heard early podcast was Colt Cabana podcast back in 2011. He interviewed Chris Masters, and without knowing that that's what podcasts would become, that's really the early days of interviewing, that I realized that there's radio interviews. There's outside of WWE, outside of what you see WWE produce interviews. Early days of Sam Roberts. I mean, one of the first interviews was a Randy Orton in a radio station back when he was doing the his DVD tour, and that's really when I got open to the idea of like, radio interviews, and there's they turn into podcasting. And then obviously I think we all were really, exposed to the idea that like a wrestling podcast could really be successful with Steve Austin releasing his podcast in 2013, and really him making it so that, a wrestling podcast can be a thing. And of course, Chris Jericho, we're all fans of these great podcasts, something to wrestle with. These podcasts paved the way for it to be that, it could be possible for us to do. So that led an idea from like, I've thought about doing it in the past, but now that there's a market for it, it's something that I could do, and it's something that I'm interested in doing. I decided it's time that I also put my thoughts and ideas on a surface like a podcast. So that's pretty much the inception of the idea. And as to when and why the timing of last year came about, I just thought it's got to happen soon, usually after WrestleMania. For us wrestling fans, as you know, the night after WrestleMania is kind of like the start of a new year, and it's going to culminate in next year's WrestleMania. It's like WrestleMania. I always say WrestleMania in wrestling, a calendar year, that it is New Year's Eve. You go out with a bang, fireworks at the end of the night, and then the next night is day one. So I really thought the best time for me to start this podcast would be around the time after WrestleMania, and then after the draft. So then I can actually start a clean slate talking about the storylines and characters going forward. And that's what I ended up doing. It was just perfect timing that I had it where the draft just happened and the rosters were being, laid out, and went on from there. And the first episode, man, I got to say, the first episode was, I was terrible at it. I didn't practice on my editing and how I was going to go about it. So the very first episode I was recording, and then when I felt like I didn't like what I said, or I like stumbled, because of course you're nervous. I'll be honest. Sometimes I'm nervous. You'll hear it on the microphone. I'll stumble across words. It's just something that I got to get used to. And throughout the year, I feel like I've gotten a lot better at that. I can just like crank out shows, and we'll get to that point. But early stages of this podcast, I was having a hard time with editing. I record a podcast, and it'd be like an hour long, or it'd be like 40 minutes. And then the editing process would be almost like 2 hours, because I would just want to like cut out so much of like pauses or mistakes or things that I felt like redos, So, or there was so much like edit marks throughout the whole early episodes, or the first, I would say, maybe 8 months. I was going through that rigorous like struggle of editing for about 2 hours or an hour and a half, and then it got to the point where the segments and the topics that I was talking about, the structure of the show, because early on I was just literally going through like match by match, and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to do match by match and talk about that, because I would be like half hour in and I'd barely be like on the first two segments, and I'm like, holy shit, I got the whole show to talk about. So I cut back to only talking about stuff that if you watch a Raw, I'd be like, okay, that is something that I really want to talk about. This other match, not so much. Okay, this stood out, so that I'm going to talk about this. So that's kind of where I got to that, and then doing the reviews of pay-per-views throughout the time. It was, pretty interesting because a lot of stuff was going on. If you remember, that's also around the same time that they did the whole where either crossover. What was the thing? I can't remember, but it was just so terrible going through the whole Baron Corbin, Seth Rollins, and Becky Lynch thing off of WrestleMania. It was a little bit of a disappointment. The Viking experience. Do you guys remember that thing last year? Oh my God. So it was some early stuff that was pretty horrible to cover, but when you look back at it, it's pretty funny and it's pretty special that we talk about and also AEW. I think this podcast really started around this AEW era, and we got to cover Double or Nothing. I did a review on that, and very early on, I did say that Chris Jericho, one thing he's never done is lead a stable. So it's on it's on record that I did say before it ever was an idea or presented that the Inner Circle was a thing, that Jericho was going to lead a stable in AEW. So go back and listen to those early episodes of me covering AEW. And then also like the first AEW show. And, this podcast then went to 2 weeks or two times during a week. And that was a challenge because I was already struggling with editing. Like I said, I was going through that process of the episode would be probably like 30 minutes in length when it's finished, or my time actually recording. But the editing process was over an hour and a half, because again, I wanted to just take out a lot of stuff, a lot of redos. I wasn't really feeling a lot of the stuff that I was doing, but I wanted to put out the best show. So it happens. I mean, sometimes like even just doing the intro is a lot like, I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that. I want it to sound, like I fucked up already. I stumble on my words, and that's all just being transparent with you guys. That happens, and I'm sure it happens to a lot of us that record a podcast and make sure that what we put out is the best stuff that we want to put out, not put out some shit that's half-ass. And believe me, sometimes it feels like that you're gonna put some half-ass shit out, but you really just crank out a good episode in the end. And that's majority of the times, which led me to a point where some of the topics I would just get carried away, and it led me to just flowing and just having a good time talking about the stuff that I was talking about, and what was on TV was good stuff. It gave me a lot of to talk about, especially those early days of NXT and AEW, because there was a lot of stuff going on and a lot of stuff to be pretty critical about. So it gave me just so much area to just cover and talk about. So it was good. And it led me to just recently where I can just hit record and crank out a show and not have to edit, and with little notes. I mean, that's another thing. My note taking, like I said early on, it was like match by match. And then it just got to, hey, I'm just going to talk about this person. I'm going to talk about this storyline, or I'm going to talk about this thing, and then give you guys my MVPs and floppers and go off the air, stuff like that. To the point where it's just like, no, it's all in my head. I know what I want to talk about. So it's a growing process, and there's going to be a lot of times where you're just like, fuck, or like, damn it, a lot of redos. There was definitely one time where I was in the editing process, and I kind of fucked up and changed the tempo on my thing. I record on iPad, and the whole thing became choppy. So if you're going to listen to the whole episode, it's like da-da-da-da-da, talk, nothing. You know what I mean? So I was just like, I'm going to have to re-record the whole thing. And I did. And in that case, I was actually more happy with the second take, the one that actually got recorded and put out, because though I was really pissed off that I had to do it all over again, I was confident in the material on that episode that I just felt like I can do it. Just don't worry about it. Just go ahead and re-record it. you know what you want to talk about, you know what you want to cover, you know what's going on right now, and you have something to say about those things. So it came out really good. And those are just like I said, growing pains of like being a podcaster for the first time. And this is my first podcast, so new experiences, but I would say I would not trade everything that I've learned in the first year, the process, the memories, everything that I actually covered and talked about. You feel really happy about. So to me, I'm really happy with where I'm at right now. And by no means is this podcast like the most successful thing right now. Where I feel like we're barely still getting off the ground. But with that said, guys, your guys' help and support really helps me out a lot. Thank you to everybody that's like listened to any episode, shared this, downloaded it. Thank you guys so much. And it's especially to everybody that's been listening to since day one or any time throughout this first year. Thank you so much for that. And I mean this when like your guys' most simplest way of supporting this podcast is by listening. But of course, a follow on Twitter and on Instagram really helps. Instagram is Speaking Wrestling. Twitter is Speaking Wrestle. You can also email me, guys, and give me any suggestions, questions about this show, guys. Tell me anything, any critical stuff, any feedback. I'll listen to it, guys, at speakingwrestling@gmail. And also, let's talk about what's been going on in wrestling, because like I said, there's some stuff that's been pretty interesting, like that whole Jeff Hardy storyline, which has been very controversial to a lot of people, whether it was a good decision for this to be a topic right now, bringing up Jeff Hardy's past into the light. And I think that's simply it right there. It's bringing dark into light. And I think Jeff has got to be in on this, because Jeff has been performing really great lately, and this story is, I think, for him, it's going to be a big relief. And like we've seen, he knows best from real life experiences of going through this. So like the first week when there was the whole car wreck scene, Jeff was just on point throughout. Anybody in that whole segment, Jeff was like hitting it. He was doing the best performance anybody else could at that moment. And then last week with his open promo, tremendous. The guy's out there pouring his heart out, talking about stuff that's real, and it means a lot to him. And I think, like I said, this is going to be so much good for him, and it's been a good storyline. And as we're going into Backlash, there's also the Braun Strowman versus Miz and Morrison, which has also been great. I really like Miz and Morrison as a duo, but Morrison has been tremendous, man. Ever since that ladder match at WrestleMania, he's looked like a main event guy, and which is why I believe he's in the spot he is right now to kind of ease him into the main event scene. I just really think that Morrison right now is a lot more comfortable than he was his first time in WWE. He's really grown up. I'm telling you, he seems a lot more loose than ever before. He's having a lot of fun, and I think this is going to be a good opportunity to have him in that main event scene and go after his first major championship. The guy is a main event guy. He looks like a main event. I think this is the time to maybe give that push to John Morrison. And also, what's been going on Raw? Not a lot of good stuff there, man. But what the hell's going on Raw? Anyways, In Your House Takeover was last week. That was a really good show, guys, which brings us to our MVPs and floppers of the week. Our MVP goes to Io Shirai, who is the new NXT Women's Champion. Oh, man, dude. Hey, she brought down the house with that performance. Good stuff there. Rhea Ripley, Charlotte, great match there. This was a good triple threat match. I really think that this match was probably like top candidate for my match of the year. It was tremendous performance from those ladies. Good stuff there. Backlash is this Sunday tonight as I'm recording this podcast. And that's it, guys. You guys have a good time. We'll do it again next time. Good night, Australia. Bye-bye.